Hi everyone, welcome to the Macquarie MD webinar. I'm Hayley Harris and I'm the Director of Educational Services for the Faculty of Medicine, Health and Human Sciences here at Macquarie, and I'll be your host for the night. So I'd like to begin our proceedings this evening by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which this university is situated, the Wadawurrung people of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the Dreamtime. We pay our respects to the Darug people and the Wadawurrung clan. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where attendees are located this evening, and I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, of those lands. I extend my respect to Indigenous guests joining us this evening. So thank you to everyone who is attending this evening. We're very excited to share some information about our medical course here at Macquarie. We have with us this evening Professor Patrick McNeill, who is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Medicine and Health at Macquarie University. He's also the Executive Dean of the Faculty and the Course Director of the Macquarie MD course. I'm also pleased to welcome Dr. Veronica Prida, who is an endocrinologist who practices here at MQ Health and is also one of our key clinical academics who teaches into the medical course. And we also have Duan Nguyen, who is one of our Macquarie MD students, one of the first cohort and currently in her final year. And next year will be one of our first interns coming out of the Macquarie MD course. And we'll have a chance to speak to some of those attendees here in a panel shortly. But I might start, we'll share with you a video around the course.
I can remember having this beautiful old piano. My grandmother Nonnie used to teach me on. She had such strong hands.
I grew up in inner city Sydney. Our neighbourhood was a melting pot of people from all backgrounds and beliefs.
As Nonnie got older, after playing the piano, her hands would get so stiff and painful.
I started volunteering and I was exposed to people from all walks of life.
I went with Nonnie to an orthopaedic hand surgeon. He explained to me the delicate intricacies that give us dexterity.
Then I went on student exchange where I stayed with a family of doctors and I learned how medicine improves the lives of vulnerable communities anywhere in the world.
Our Macquarie MD program aims to prepare future leaders in healthcare who are patient and safety focused, culturally responsive, and equipped to work in increasingly digital health systems. Macquarie University is the only Australian university that owns its own hospital and clinics, integrating education, research, and clinical practice all on the one campus. Our students will have extended exposure to international clinical experiences. They will develop cultural responsiveness and learn about different health systems, preparing them to work in multicultural Australian and global communities. With a small student community, the program aims to provide an exceptional student experience to the next generation of doctors, setting a solid foundation for the practice of medicine in an ever-changing world.
Watching Nonnie play piano after surgery, I knew what I wanted to do.
I knew my purpose was to help communities in need all over the world.
Realize your calling.
Okay, I'd now like to introduce to you Professor Patrick McNeill, who's going to share with you some information around the Macquarie MD. Thank you, Professor McNeill.
Thanks very much, Hayley, and welcome everybody who's joining this webinar. So I've got a few slides just to give you in some graphical form some aspects of the Macquarie MD and its structure. If we could go to the next slide. So this is a snapshot of the Macquarie MD. It's a 4-year graduate entry medical course. I think most people would be aware that medical education courses in Australia are either what we call undergraduate entry, where our students enter straight from or can enter as their first degree. And about half the medical schools in Australia run an undergraduate course, and about half the medical schools in Australia run what's called a graduate entry course. And so the Macquarie MD is a graduate entry medical course which confers a degree called the Doctor of Medicine. Clinical placements are undertaken predominantly in Australia, although when we designed the Macquarie MD, we really did design it really as in many ways the first global MD program. And I'll talk about that in a little while about why we did that. But it does, in its design, provide placements for students to undertake learning in health systems, both in Australia and internationally. One of the characteristics and one of the advantages of the Macquarie MD is we deliberately designed it for a small student cohort. Many medical courses in Australia, you enter a cohort of up to 300 or more students. The Macquarie MD is around about 60 students, mostly domestic students with some international students. And that really provides a lot of opportunity for students to get to know each other well, to have good interactions with each other and with their teachers. And it's not unusual that every student knows their lecturers' first names, and it really builds, we believe, a very strong cohort identity, which we believe is very beneficial, and which our students feedback as one of the strengths. It is we designed the Macquarie MD as a fresh, future-focused curriculum. I think new medical schools, and Macquarie is not the newest medical school in Australia now. There is the Murray-Darling Medical School based around Charles Sturt University, which took in its first intake this year. But the Macquarie MD has been Australia's newest medical school. And rather than adopt someone else's curriculum, we really designed the Macquarie MD as really a blue sky, saying what sort of education do future doctors need in this century. And it's always hard to predict the future, but we did design it around what we predicted future healthcare would be. And back when we did this work, no one predicted a global pandemic. But it's interesting that we put remote learning, digital learning, as part of the skill set that a future doctor would need. We put in place that we wanted to train graduates who understand they were part of a health system. And I think COVID has taught us that systems of healthcare are really important to address major health problems such as a pandemic. So these are some of the aspects of the Macquarie MD in a single slide. If we go to the next slide, I'll show you then how the course is structured. It's structured around 2 stages, with stage 1 being the first 2 years and stage 2 being the second 2 years. So year 1 is what we call Foundations of Medical Practice. As a graduate entry program, many of our students will come into the Macquarie MD having studied some form of clinical science or medical science, although we don't have any prerequisites other than studying an undergraduate degree. And so we do provide a foundation of applied medical sciences, which represents about half of the learning in year 1 through two units of study, Applied Medical Sciences 1 and Applied Medical Sciences 2. We introduce students to clinical practice right from day 1, and we do that in safe, simulated environments. And that is because the evidence is that learning skills that require talking to people with health problems and examining people with health problems is best done in an environment where students feel comfortable and safe, rather than in an environment where you have patients who are sick, who are unwell. The experience is that if you put very junior apprentices into that environment, that is not a good learning environment for people to optimally develop their skills. So there is a whole year of learning clinical practice, the way that we take a systematic history of the patient's illness, the way we examine patients in a systematic way, and we call that clinical practice. And that runs through the whole of year one. And we assess the learning through objective structured clinical examinations at the end of each of those sessions. And I can tell you, having examined our first year students in those in halfway through year one, at the end of year one, they are remarkably proficient because they've learned in a very safe environment with generalist tutors. So that's an important part of year one. And then there's 2 units which are taught in a professional way. We actually teach those, we co-teach them with our Doctor of Physiotherapy students, called Evidence-Based Healthcare and Interprofessional Healthcare. So that's year one, and that really provides a great foundation then for clinical learning, which occupies years 2, 3, and 4. In year 2, our learning is what we call integrated. So we don't teach pathology, microbiology. We teach them all those things in an integrated way around the systems of the body. And students are divided into thirds, and they do these 3 courses. You see there: primary care, wellbeing and cancer, or musculoskeletal, neurosciences and aging, or cardiovascular, respiratory, etc., in different orders. So at any point in time, there's always students studying one of those in different thirds. And so over those first 9 months of year 2, all students will go through those blocks and have clinical experiences in real settings in Macquarie University Hospital and other partner hospitals and settings, which include primary care settings. And that provides students the ability to build upon their foundation clinical skills to start developing clinical reasoning and understanding disease processes which the patients have. The final block in year 2 is critical care, patient safety and quality. Patient safety and quality curriculum is vertically integrated in the Macquarie MD, and really is probably one of the most exceptional parts of the curriculum, because it's a very comprehensive teaching and learning strategy in these aspects of healthcare, which are so relevant to modern and future times. And it's also a block where all the students come together again and start finalising their research project, which starts in year 3. So that's stage 1, years 1 and 2. That is predominantly on the Macquarie University campus. In stage 2, which is years 3 and 4, students undertake a lot of their learning in clinical placements in our own hospital and in partner hospitals. And in year 3, we call that core clinical placements, where students rotate through the core disciplines of medicine, which include medicine, surgery, pediatrics, obstetrics, gynecology, and primary care. And the design is that students for half the year would undertake those in Sydney, either at our own MQ Health Service, Macquarie University Hospital and Clinics, or at the Northern Sydney Local Health District, Royal North Shore Hospital and Northern Beaches Hospital in Sydney, Australia. And the other half of year 3 is undertaking those same clinical disciplines in our partner hospital in India, Apollo Hospital in Hyderabad. Now, of course, that plan is on hold at the moment because of the international travel bans and the global pandemic. But our first cohort of students did start that experience last year for about 7 or 8 weeks before bans on global travel meant that we couldn't continue. So that's year 3. And then year 4 is what we call advanced clinical placements. And this is, the last year, the pre-internship year, where is structured in quarters, if you like, and students do two prescribed blocks, one called critical and acute care, which has settings particularly in intensive care and the emergency department of our partner hospitals at Northern Beaches Hospital and Royal North Shore Hospital. And then a mental health placement, again for 8 weeks, which is done in our partner hospitals, Northern Beaches Hospital and Royal North Shore Hospital, and other hospitals in the Northern Sydney Local Health District. And then, so that occupies around about half of year 4, those two prescribed blocks. And then the other half of year 4, students can choose from a menu of selective clinical placements and do an elective at any facility that they make, any suitable facility they make arrangements to do. You'll also see on this slide that students undertake a research project throughout all of year 3 and half of year 4. And that is a research project which is done while students are undertaking their clinical placements. And so by the nature of the research projects, they generally are undertaking research into an aspect of health systems or health services or patient safety and quality, or a clinical research project which can easily meld with their clinical experiences. So if we go to the next slide, that gives you a summary of the structure of the Macquarie MD. In terms of admissions information, as I mentioned, it's a graduate entry degree, so students need to have completed a bachelor degree in the year of application. We take into account academic performance, which is called GPA, or grade point average, which has a minimum weighted GPA of 5 out of 7, although many of our applicants have who get accepted because it's competitive have much higher GPAs. We use the GAMSAT in the selection process, particularly as I'll talk about in determining invitation to interview, and we also then require applicants to write a personal statement, which is relatively brief. It's not a portfolio of narrative. It's quite structured, relatively small, and that really examines applicants' understanding of the global nature of the Macquarie MD, and also their understanding and their kind of a self-reflection on their suitability for those global placements. And then there is a interview, which we use an MMI process, or multiple mini interview stations, where we examine a range of attributes and capabilities which we think might be suitable for study in the Macquarie MD. We determine, we get a lot of applicants. I think we had over 700 or 800 applicants last year. The application process goes through the national GEMSAT system, which I've got a slide on in a minute. To be invited to interview, or GEMSAT takes into account academic performance, GPA or WAM, weighted average mark. 50% of the ranking is based on that, and 50% is based on the GAMSAT score and a satisfactory completion of the personal statement. Once after the interview, that is scored, and then we essentially rank all applicants based on their GPA and MMI. So the GAMSAT score is only a factor in determining invitation to interview. The determination of selection is based on academic performance through GPA and interview score. So that, I think we're going to open up to a panel for questions, and I'll invite, Haley's already introduced Associate Professor Veronica Prida and Duan, who's one of our 4th year students. So I think we're moving to that now, Haley.
Thank you, Patrick. So Duan and Associate Professor Prida, did you want to turn on your video so we can all see you? Thank you. Just while Dwan's turning on her video, I'll also remind, so we have over 100 participants joining us live this evening, which is fantastic. So welcome to you all. And about the same amount who are here on our campus in our health precinct in our new clinical education building, which is fantastic. For our online participants, please feel free to add any questions. There's a Q&A function in the Zoom meeting. Please feel free to add any questions you have there, and we will have a chance for some Q&A at the end of the panel as well. So the first question I really wanted to put to the panel is firstly to Dwan. Could you please start off by briefly sharing why you chose to study the Macquarie MD and how you found the application process?
Yeah, sure. It's pretty much, sorry, it's pretty much a summary of what Prof McNeil has just described in his slides. Just a little bit of a background, I came from an undergraduate degree that had thousands of people. And what I was really looking for in a postgraduate medical degree was a smaller cohort, because I think I just identified that that was the learning style that I had, was to be up close and sort of personal with my educators and the people that were teaching me. And I found that an invaluable tool within this degree. And the other part of why I chose the Macquarie MD was the global sort of focus of the degree, because as a person, I knew that I loved traveling, and in order to combine, my passions of science and my passions of traveling, it almost felt like this degree was the perfect combination for what I wanted. And the last thing was that I've always been up for a challenge, and I thought, well, apart from medicine, then, what else could I do? I could take on going to India, and I can't wait to be able to explain or talk to that experience. But in terms of the application process, like we've gone through in this webinar, it's quite self-explanatory. The one unique aspect of it that I found was the personal statement, in which you speak to why you're open to, traveling and what challenges you might encounter. And I think that to me was actually quite a reflective, or it encouraged me to reflect on why exactly I wanted to do medicine, as well as why the Macquarie MD. And that's something that we all kind of do personally.
Thanks so much, Dwan. Dr. Prida, what would be the main piece of advice you'd offer prospective students in the audience today who want to enter the medical profession?
I think you have to do medicine because you love it, and medicine has many facets. And so to say that you want to do it for one reason, you'll probably be surprised at what an awesome opportunity you have in front of you, because it allows you to go from potentially being a researcher to make a change to people's lives in clinic and across to the clinic, and you can bring that aspect into touching each and every one of your patients. If you're not a lab type person, that's absolutely fine too. Medicine offers an enormous plethora of clinical opportunities, be they along the medical or surgical lines. And then, as we talked about this evening, at a broader context, the pandemic has really epitomised how vital medicine is for each and every Australian, each and every global citizen, and our role really in society to help different countries who struggle, be it in India at the moment with their second wave. And I think, you can really touch the lives of not only small numbers of patients, but enormous numbers of patients for the betterment of humanity. But if you're not motivated by good reasons to come to medicine, of which I could bring out some of the negatives, then I think you need to take a long, hard look as to why you want to do medicine and how you want to give back in a job that is a service job and that can give you enormous satisfaction for humanity, rather than self-seeking behaviours as some other professions might be.
Thank you very much. Patrick, you touched on some of the structure of the course. Are there particular unique aspects around the Macquarie MD that our attendees should know about, and how it is kind of set apart from other medical courses they may be interested in applying to?
Yeah, thanks, Haley. Look, I've been educating medical students for over 30 years. So, you know, I've taught in traditional medical courses. You know, I had a hand in leading the development of a very innovative new one at the university I was at before I came to Macquarie. And I guess the first thing to say about the Macquarie MD, it's been designed as a fresh, new, modern, future-focused educational course. And you know, I think the world is changing so quickly that thinking that the way that I learned when I went to medical school, you know, quite a long time ago, is going to be suitable for educating the current students, you know, it's just wrong. So I think the first thing is we can, you know, really reassure applicants that they're entering a very future-focused modern course. As I said, we really designed this in many ways with a large international exchange and experience, recognizing that, you know, pre-COVID, the world was very transnational, that not only medical professionals, but humans in general were global citizens. And we did it for another reason, because we felt that graduates needed to recognize that they weren't just a competent doctor, but they were part of a health system. And, you know, I think it's true to say that too many of our, Veronica and my colleagues, you know, are individualists, and they don't understand that actually health is a system if you really want to deliver high quality healthcare to people. It is an interprofessional business. We might, you know, some of my colleagues might think that they work as individuals, but we all work very collaboratively with other professions and with each other. Specialists, primary care work together, and so we were quite committed to that, and we wanted to let our students experience the concept of systems of healthcare by experiencing another system. And so we chose a system that was different to Australia, that was English speaking, that was international quality, with our partner hospital in India. You know, Duan might talk about briefly her experience as a student in Hyderabad, which really was received very positively by half of our year 3 cohort last year who managed to have that experience. So that is one advantage. I think the second thing is what Duan already talked about, was the small cohort. I actually went to university at the University of Tasmania, which is a little medical school. When I went there, I was in a cohort of 48, and it was a great experience because you really did feel that you were important as a student doctor, that you were accepted by our teachers, and you had really strong bonds between both your teachers and each other. And that's, you know, you can't, you know, it's very hard to do that when you're in a class of 300. So that we've deliberately decided to keep the cohort size at around about that size. I think that the next advantage is that Macquarie is the only university that runs its own health service, a completely comprehensive health service here on campus, MQ Health. We have our own hospital, we have our own clinics. And what that means is many of the people who are teaching you as a medical student are practitioners, like Veronica, who practice as an endocrinologist here within MQ Health, with her students in her clinic, or other doctors who are surgeons. Our students get to have experiences in the operating theatre with the people who are teaching them, whilst they are practicing within our health service. And that provides, you know, a very practical and work integrated essence to the education in the Macquarie MD. I think the other thing is, the Macquarie MD is within a larger faculty that's quite cross-disciplinary, the Faculty of Medicine, Health and Human Sciences. I mentioned that our students learn with our Doctor of Physiotherapy students at stages. We also offer, you know, the Bachelor of Clinical Science, and some people on the webinar may be from year 12 and thinking about medicine. One of the pathways that a number of our students take is to do our Bachelor of Clinical Science, which is a 2-year fast-tracked degree 3 years of study within 2 calendar years. And then, there are some advantages in doing that and then applying for the Macquarie MD as a 6-year 2+4. So that's quite an attractive proposition, and many people, I think there's maybe 10 or 11 of our current cohort who did the Bachelor of Clinical Science, which is a great preparation for the Macquarie MD. So there's some of the advantages, I guess, of the Macquarie MD over other universities, which are all wonderful institutions as well. Our degree is accredited by the AMC. It's approved by the Medical Board of Australia, and our graduates are guaranteed, our domestic graduates are guaranteed an internship in New South Wales, so that's kind of a quick summary.
Thanks, Patrick. And I guess it's true to say that the BClin Sci is a really great pathway, but we recently removed our prerequisites on admissions. So many degrees are now good pathways into the Macquarie MD, with some preparation for students who may not have taken anatomy or physiology as a foundation course in the first year. If anyone's out there not doing a medical science or a clinical science degree, there's still options in.
And I think our student cohort is actually quite national. We have many students from New South Wales, but we also have many students from Victoria, Queensland and other states of Australia. So it's quite they bond quite well as a group, we've found.
Thank you. Veronica, would you mind sharing with us maybe a bit of a personal reflection, your most memorable moment as a doctor that either changed, inspired or confirmed your decision to move into the medical profession?
I actually think my most memorable moment was watching my father, who's a retired doctor, wander around the nursing home, looking after all his patients and bringing, I think, brightness and kindness into their lives. But he had this amazing bag with all these things in it and these cool drawers. And I just thought it was amazing that he could both work out what was wrong with someone, but also cheer them up and make their life better. And having seen that time and time again, we can be as clever as we like. We can write as many letters to other colleagues, but at the end of the day, medicine is about alleviating a lot of suffering and about making people's lives better.
Thanks, Veronica.
And I'll say that my dad's been a patient in Macquarie, and I can't fault the care that he has been given by all my colleagues, some of whom have been long-standing, mentors of mine and people who I went to theatres with when I was a medical student. So you're very privileged that some of them have defected across to also work at Macquarie with all the state-of-art services that we can offer patients, and very excellent care, even if they did know it was my dad.
Thank you. And obviously some of them teaching into the course as well, which is exciting.
Yes. And you can see that in my background, which is a bit dodgy in the lighting, but we have a fabulous hospital with fabulous doctors who, in provision of care, I have to say, world class. And right from the radiology department to the physicians, to the surgeons, to the intensivists, to the physiotherapists, to the, of course, most important nursing staff who do much of the grunt work when you're sitting on the ward, right down to the person serving you your dinner and the exceptional catering that makes patients put on weight because it's so good. So you're very lucky as students that you can come to a private hospital.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that Veronica makes. The Macquarie University Hospital, which is part of MQ Health, is a private hospital, but it resembles very much a public teaching hospital. We employ interns, we employ registrars and fellows and residents staff, as well as the consultants. And unlike a very busy public hospital, which can be a little bit daunting for medical students to learn their craft in. Macquarie University Hospital is not that kind of big busy place. It is busy, but it you know, it is quite well, Duane can talk. I shouldn't take words out of her mouth about her experience, but I think our students really like learning in Macquarie University Hospital, particularly for their foundation learning in years 2 and 3.
You can get lost in a juggernaut, and I remember the big teaching hospitals. No one cared whether you turned up, didn't turn up, whether you're present, absent, fell down, had a vasovagal on the floor, too bad, which some of you might do on a long ward round that takes 8 or 10 hours, seeing the same boring stuff. You don't get lost in the system in Macquarie, because we'll hunt you down, find you, and find your logbook that you have to submit to me. Don't they, Patrick?
Very right.
We might talk a little bit about the international placements. There's actually a few questions coming through, so thanks to everyone putting those through. Duane, maybe we'll start with you reflecting on just briefly about your experience of India, the short weeks before COVID hit, and then I might feed some of the questions coming through the chat into the panel.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent, I think, 8 or 9 weeks in India, which most of it was spent in pediatrics and a little bit in obstetrics and gynecology, which is, you know, children and pregnancy and labour at women's health for those who aren't sure. We were promised an immersive experience, and that it was. We dove sort of headfirst into a healthcare system that is so different to our own, which then gave us this insight into what diverse culture, a different culture, and the diverse presentations of illnesses that we would have seen here. And I was able to compare that to, you know, my knowledge and just absorb. It felt like being a sponge in a completely new world. I know from speaking to my colleagues that, you know, we were able to see and do a lot in Apollo Hospital, which was one of the biggest privileges. A lot of us attended theatres, we helped with births, we saw very sick patients and also very well patients. It is a completely different system over there. And I guess in reflecting, it's given me a lot to think about, because once returning to Australia, I was aware of this completely different public health system and health economics that existed in another country. And so what I could do then was compare it to my own. And now that I've, as you know, Prof McNeil has said, we've got a private hospital here, but then I've also dipped my toes in a public hospital and then dipped my toes in some rural hospitals as well. And so what I've got is this really rich understanding of what healthcare can look like or should look like, which has allowed me to really challenge some of the stuff I've seen even here in Australia because of the things that I've seen in India.
Thanks, Duane. And Patrick, I might pose some of the questions to you. So there's a theme around whether the Indian component is compulsory, and particularly at this point in time with COVID. And then also some questions around what other opportunities outside of Apollo might there be globally or regionally, or even across Sydney. So just really, what's the whole system of placements available?
Yeah, so the experience in Apollo is a compulsory or mandatory part of the Macquarie MD, and that's one of the reasons we ask people to complete a personal statement, so they understand that. Because if you feel that that's not something you want to do in your medical education, then you really should probably apply for another medical school place. Now, having said that, the COVID pandemic has changed everything, and so we will assess that year by year. And currently, our Year 3 students are not going to Apollo this year. Next year, we have done some scenario planning, and our Year 3 students may go to Apollo next year. We haven't worked out exactly whether that'll be mandatory or voluntary. When we've asked our current Year 2 students, about half of them still want to go if it was available. So but you know, we're not going to undertake placements where we that are not safe for our students. So we'll look at the safety of the situation. We'll look at those things. So, and you know, so I think the answer is it's mandatory, subject to however the pandemic evolves over the next few years. Apollo is still very engaged. In fact, our Apollo doctors still participate in some of the teaching remotely to our current students. We also had a number of other agreements with medical schools in the United States, including Dartmouth College or Dartmouth University, which is one of the Ivy League universities in the US, the fourth oldest medical school in the United States. So we did have an agreement. In fact, we had one of Dartmouth medical students about to come and do an exchange at Macquarie when the pandemic hit, and we had to stop that. So we do have agreements with a couple of US medical schools. In Australia, one of the things that the pandemic has done is accelerated partnerships with other clinical placement health services in Australia, and so we do have a clinical school established now at the new Northern Beaches Hospital at Frenchs Forest in Sydney, and that's an interesting hospital. It's run by Healthscope, which is a private hospital, but it's a private-public partnership with the Northern Sydney Local Health District. And so it's a very busy hospital. It's brand new. It's a beautiful physical hospital. It has a large emergency department. It has obstetrics and pediatrics. And we've established a clinical school there, which has been very, very successful, only starting this year. The doctors there have been very keen to have medical students. They're very keen to teach them. And so that, in many ways, although that was on our agenda to work through, the pandemic's accelerated. So that's a real opportunity for getting experiences of busy hospitals that have emergency departments. We've also got an agreement with the Rural Clinical School, which is part of University of New South Wales at Coffs Harbour. In fact, well, the agreement's with UNSW, so it could be other clinical sites, but we focus on Coffs Harbour. So if some of our students are doing selective rotations in Coffs Harbour, and we're taking some UNSW students who are based in Coffs Harbour who want to do electives here at our own Macquarie University Hospital. So that's a really, win-win situation for both medical schools, and a really good example of collaboration between universities. And then some of our students are doing electives in other parts of Australia. I think we've got a student doing an elective in Darwin at the moment. I think there was a question about why Macquarie, why doesn't Macquarie have Commonwealth supported places? We offer, our places are all full fee places for domestic and international students. And so we're not, we actually don't have the requirements to take students from a rural entry scheme. We don't have the requirements to ensure that all our students undertake rural placements, as universities that do have Commonwealth supported placements and have agreements with the federal government for those rural programs do. But many of our students are interested in having experiences and may contemplate seriously a career in rural or regional areas. And so to cater for those student interests, we have been establishing these partnerships in regional Australia. So that hopefully answers a few of those questions, Hayley.
Thanks, Patrick. And not surprisingly, there's lots of interest in what the average admission threshold is. So I might just take that one, and some questions around the number of applicants. So Patrick shared the minimum requirements, but indicated that often our cohorts are more competitive than the minimum threshold. So there was a question around how many applicants we've had. So this year we had, for the first year cohort, 978 applicants, and that's up by about 300 from a couple of years prior to that. And the average GPA of that cohort was 6.7 out of 7, and the average GAMSAT was 65. There was a question about what are the interview stations. Unfortunately, I can't share that, but I think that what we could say is there are 8 stations and they're 8 minutes each. And that's probably all I can say about the interview stations. Duan, there was a question around what the student support is like as a student in the Macquarie MD. Would you mind responding to that?
Yeah, of course. So like we've said several times, we've got a very small cohort. And what that lends itself to is some really strong support networks in amongst the students themselves, as well as having, you're on like a first name basis with many of your supervisors, your educators, your lecturers. And so oftentimes, most of us, when we reach a point where you're feeling a little down or you're feeling a little stuck, we do reach out to our supervisors and our lecturers and our professors. And I think that is a luxury that we acknowledge that not all medical schools can afford. And that's something that we've all relied on, especially as the first cohort going through. We've relied on each other as well as the faculty. As well as that, at Macquarie, we've got plenty of student support services on main campus, because a lot of the times, if you're not comfortable speaking to someone directly involved in your learning, we've got a lot of confidential services on main campus that many of us will advocate for, because it's like having free psychologists that are available online or in person, depending on what you are looking for, what you're comfortable with. So there's actually quite a bit of student support around, but I would say personally, my main source of support would be the friends that I've made, as well as the faculty members that have taught me along the way.
Thanks, Tuan. And Patrick, you talked briefly around the course being fee help. There are quite a number of questions around the fee structure for the course. I just wondered if you could respond to how students might be able to access the course with the fees that we have.
Look, we're very conscious that this course is not accessible to everybody. And so we have been increasing the number of scholarships. So we do offer, I think it's up to 10 scholarships each year for the 4 years of the course. And they're not little scholarships, they're scholarships of around about $30,000 per year, or even there's one or two at $50,000 a year, which covers a substantial part of the full fees. And our aim is, and these are funded generally by donations, our aim is to increase the number of those scholarships progressively, so that we can make the course more accessible to everybody. But that's the situation. To create a medical course in Australia, establishing agreements with government to get Commonwealth supported places is a challenging process, which I don't need to talk about too much. But having a full fee program does provide us with significant flexibility in making decisions about the students we take in. So then there is fee help, which is a little bit like HECS, which is a federal government loan system, where even though you're undertaking a full fee program rather than a Commonwealth supported program, you still can apply to fee help to defer the payment that you have to pay. There are some caps on that, which which we can take, provide details if you've got questions. So there are a number of strategies by which the Macquarie MD can be financially accessible.
Thanks, Patrick. And we will share a slide with the Macquarie MD website too that does have details around those scholarships, and we're happy to receive emails with questions around that. There's a few questions from interested people around, is the course flexible for full-time work? what should I expect in terms of workload? And I'm not sure which panel member to throw that to. So I might, maybe each of you will have a different reflection on that question.
Diane, I think you should go for that, because we might think we know the answer, but I'm sure you know whether how much work you can do as a student.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question, because I think if you can do both, I mean, that's pretty impressive. I'll speak to some of the experiences I've kind of accumulated and some of the people in my cohort. Many of us are from, diverse backgrounds. Some of us have come from full-time jobs or jobs within healthcare as receptionists, pharmacists, or radiologists. And from my understanding, it totally depends on your, I guess, your ability to balance a lot of that. A lot of my friends who have had those jobs have managed to stay part-time or casual, depending on the commitments of different rotations. Obviously, in times where you're going over to India or you're doing an elective in Darwin, which is what I did, then you might have to make some of those sacrifices. But otherwise, I know of many, many people who are able to balance the part-time jobs and the full-time study in med school. But no one's come onto my radar who's been managing both at the same time. So that's what I can say on that.
And I'll speak to that as having a lot of students who are across different parts of the course, because I see you right through your first year, where there's lectures and some specific masterclasses through to your research units. And I'd have to say, as a teacher into your course and seeing you, but also having had the understanding of where you're coming from, and many of this, it's a financial sacrifice, and that is part of the motivation of whether you truly want to do this, I guess, coming into the program, is that you want to give it your best. 4 years is not a long time in the grand scheme of things, and in the journey to become good at your craft, this is only the very beginning. So you might think that this is your ticket. It is, in some ways, it's one step along the pathway of a life of learning, I have to say. And I think you need to be cautious with your expectations. If you think that you can juggle a full-time job as a radiographer, which is, an area that some of our students have come from, or as a pharmacist, you won't be able to juggle that with the demands of the course during session. Granted, university does have holidays and there are different university breaks, and you might want to optimize your income in those breaks. But I'd caution you to have the expectation that you can have a full-time job and then compromise your learning. That would be a costly mistake, because you can't do both well. So I think you want to get the most out of the program, the opportunities offered to you, plus also stay healthy and sane. And that's a big problem for students, learning the balance of mental health as well. And that's not going to happen if you're tired from both aspects. So I think you also have to look after yourself and maybe timetable out jobs that can be casual jobs in the holidays, etc., rather than thinking you can hold down a full-time job, because you won't do either justice.
Thanks, Veronica and Tuan. There's a few questions around the cost of placements in the course. And so essentially the placements across the course are included in the course. And additionally, with India, the travel costs and the cost of accommodation for that 22-week placement are included in the fee structure as well. There's a couple of questions around what it takes to become a doctor. So what are the steps after the MD? One of which is internship, which is another pattern of questions. Am I definitely going to get an internship? And Patrick, there was some interesting data released quite recently around internship numbers. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, because Macquarie University is a public university in New South Wales, the part of New South Wales Health that organises postgraduate medical training called HETI, or the Health Education and Training Institute, classifies graduates of Australian medical schools into a number of priority groups. And graduates from Macquarie MD are in the highest priority group for an internship. So essentially that means you're guaranteed an internship in a New South Wales hospital. This coming year in 2022, when our students will graduate, HETI have told the medical deans of New South Wales that there'll be a little over 1,000, I think it's 1,050 intern jobs to be filled next year. And there's expected to be about 859 domestic graduates from New South Wales medical schools. So what that means is that that includes the Macquarie MD 46 expected graduates. And then, so as a domestic student, you'll be guaranteed, as an if you're an international citizen graduating from Macquarie MD, you've got a pretty good chance of getting a New South Wales internship. In fact, last year or this year, New South Wales Health had 6 unfilled intern jobs. So that means everybody who wanted an internship in New South Wales, including international graduates, got one, but the international graduates of New South Wales medical schools are a lower priority than domestic graduates. That's the way HETI works, their prioritisation scheme. So internship is not guaranteed for an international graduate, but at least this year, and I think the year before, anyone who wanted one got one. A number of international graduates go back to their home countries. So that's the situation, but it changes every year, but the guarantee of domestic graduates hasn't changed at all in recent years. So that's why I said you're guaranteed an intern position.
Thank you, Patrick. I realise we're nearly at time. There are some questions that we haven't had a chance to get to. We will be following up with attendees tomorrow morning with a recording of this event and contact details if you do have questions that weren't answered through the live channels. We'll also have some opportunities after this for those who are here with us on campus to ask questions. There was one question for Duan around what is mums and what's that experience like, but we do actually have some mums representatives with us here in person that came from someone in GO3. So please seek our mums students out and you could ask that question of them directly. I just want to thank Patrick, Veronica and Duan for your time this evening and sharing your insights and personal experiences. I hope it's helpful for all who attended. For those joining us here on campus, we will ask you to proceed to the foyer for some networking, advising and tours of MQ Health. And we really hope to see some of you who've attended here with us next year or in future years to come. Thank you so much.